Hi, welcome to What? And this is Series 16 and number 7. And we're talking about Joseph being sold to an Egyptian official. It says in verse 1 of chapter 39, now Joseph had been taken to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. Now, some stuff about Potiphar. He was an officer of Pharaoh. He was the captain of the guard, an Egyptian. Okay, the name Potiphar means devoted to the sun. It was the name connected to the Egyptian religious system. As an officer of Pharaoh, we realize that the ancient Hebrew word officer here could be translated also eunuch, one who'd been castrated, and normally for the sake of this service. It was a common practice in ancient times to make the highest in the royal courts eunuchs to ensure that they would be wholly devoted to their king. Because this practice was common, the term came to be used for all who served in the important positions in the king's court, whether they were actually eunuchs or not. Therefore, we actually don't know if he was a eunuch or whether he was, what he was. He was also titled the captain of the guard. The idea behind this title sort of gives us the idea he's the chief of police. Or probably more precisely, Potiphar was head of Pharaoh's personal security force. He was a highly trusted official in the government of Egypt. We also remember that he was brought to Egypt by these Ishmaelite guys that Joseph's brothers had sold him to. So Joseph is a slave. He seemed to have no control over his destiny, but he was bought and sold like a piece of property. Yep. He could have ended up with anyone, but it was Potiphar who bought him. Okay? This is a God-ordained kind of thing that happened. In verses 2 and 3, it says, the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all he did prosper in his hand. That terminology, the Lord was with Joseph. The whole ordeal was probably much worse than we can even imagine, yet God didn't abandon him, even in the smallest ways. If God allowed Joseph to be a slave, then God was going to make him a successful slave. We often complain to God about the terrible stuff and the difficult stuff that we can be in at different times. Yet God's will is that we trust him to bless us and make us successful. And I suppose it's got to be in the measure of success that he has for us. And we can be successful wherever. Externally, it didn't always appear that God was with Joseph, for he didn't always seem to be prosperous. After all, he was he was a slave. But when you come to look at who he was, a servant of God, you see his true likeness. He lived in communion with the Most High, with God, and God blessed him all the way through his life. Some people think they can't be blessed unless they are an authority in charge of things. Joseph shows us something different, as did Jesus. Jesus lived and taught a better way, a life of a servant. If you want to be great in God's kingdom, learn to be a servant. Look at Matthew chapter 20 and verse 26. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. That's in Matthew 20:28. There are many wonderful titles for Jesus the Messiah, but the one that is meaningful to us in this situation is servant of the Lord. Matthew 12 and verse 18. Believers can and must learn the blessing of being a servant. If it isn't forced upon a believer, then we can choose to be a servant. Joseph was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Even at this early point, when it seemed Joseph had no control over his circumstances, and he didn't have either. There was no control over what was going on. God overruled the evil, and the choices of man to accomplish his eternal purpose. Yeah. It says there, and his master saw that the Lord was with him. By his trust in God and his diligent work and blessing from God, Joseph showed Potiphar that God was real, and Potiphar recognized it. Followers of Jesus should live out the same principle today. Others should see the difference Jesus makes in our life by the way that we work. It says there, the Lord was with him. Think of the contrast between Joseph and his brothers. The brothers weren't sold as slaves and they slept in their own beds among their families. Were they successful? Joseph was a slave, but in a different way free. But the brothers were free, but slaves to secrets and shame and guilt. Catch you next week.